In my previous video I talked about finding time for photography, particularly concentrating on landscape photography and taking advantage of the time I spent on my daily dog walks. But landscape photography really is only part of my photographic interests, and when I get the opportunity I also like to take pictures of wildlife. And so what I want to do in this video is just to go through how I ended up with the systems that I've got at the moment in terms of both cameras and lenses, because it's somewhat different story to the sorts of things that you more commonly see in terms of detailed technical analysis and detailed research on different types of camera. So to give you an idea where I started out, initially my walk around camera was a Sony RX100 Mark I. So this is the camera, fairly small, easily sits into a pocket, 20 megapixel camera, 1-inch sensor, rear screen but no viewfinder. The camera system that I used as a walk around for wildlife photography is basically this setup here. This is a Nikon D7000 with a Tokina 80-400 zoom lens. Now the D7000 I bought new, but shortly after its successor was bought out to take advantage of the price reductions. The Tokina I bought over a decade ago is probably nearly 15 years old now. I only paid £100 for it, and at the time I had a D200, and with the high ISO capabilities of that camera it was only really feasible to use the Tokina combination on a tripod. With the D7000 it became feasible to use it as a walk around lens, but with some caveats with regard to the extreme focal length range and the need to stop the lens down. So that was my combination. It wasn't perfect, but it was reasonably cost effective, and it enabled me to take some reasonable pictures. And the photo that I put up at the start of this video, although it wasn't a wildlife picture, was actually taken with the Nikon Tokina combination, and that picture won me a 4th place in the National Trust Handbook competition for the year it was submitted, and in fact it won me the camera that is recording this video today. So it again shows you don't need absolute cutting-edge gear to take photos that will have some value to you. So I had this system, but I recognised the limitations of the Tokina lens, and I was interested in the possibility of getting a replacement lens, and also the possibility of perhaps updating the D7000 to a more recent Nikon camera. The problem was that the replacement options for the 80-400 range, there was a Tamron and there was a Sigma alternative, they weren't a lot lighter. They clearly would have offered significant advances in terms of autofocus, optical quality and image stabilization. But we're talking £600-700 quid. To replace the camera, update the camera, would be another £700-800. At that time I would have been looking at going up to the D7200. So it wasn't ideal, so I did nothing. And then my hand was really forced by the fact that the little Sony packed up. Just shortly out of warranty, the lens stopped extending and retracting. And looking online, it was clear I wasn't alone in having this problem, but more significantly, Sony hadn't acknowledged it or put out a fix. The cost of replacing the camera was about repairing the camera was about 50% of its replacement cost. And as there was every possibility it might fail again, I decided not to go down that route. I did look at the possibility of a Lumix alternative, the LX100 and then the LX200, but there were various issues with those, and I wasn't totally convinced. Plus the LX200 had just come out and was about £800. But as luck would have it, I saw that there was a cashback on the Lumix DX9. Now this was a bigger camera than the Sony, but it would still fit into a coat pocket, although not a trouser pocket as the Sony would. With the cashback, that camera, the DX9 with a 12-32mm zoom lens, worked out at £450. And you then have the benefit of a 20 megapixel camera on a Micro Four Thirds sensor and the potential to use a wide range of lenses. So I decided that I would make that my walk around lens and use it in combination with the D7000 Tokina until I came up with a better solution for the telephoto N. Having got the DX9 and being very pleased with it, as luck would have it, I knew somebody who had the 100 to 300 telephoto lens, Panasonic lens for use with the Lumix, and I borrowed it. Now this gives me effectively the same focal length as the Nikon Tokina combination, allowing for the 1.5 crop factor on the Nikon and a 2 times crop factor on the Micro Four Thirds. The effective maximum focal length was the same. The advantage of the Lumix system is the DX9 has in-body stabilization, the 100 to 300 lens has lens stabilization, and they work together to give a claimed 4-stop reduction. So I borrowed this for a week, and I found that I could use the telephoto lens at effective 300, keeping ISO under most conditions below 1600, and I could get sharp pictures with a shutter speed of around 250 and the lens wide open. So on that basis I decided to buy that lens. So now I had the DX9 taking up the role to replace the Nikon, but it left me with the problem of what to use with the walk-around system, because I didn't want to be changing lenses. Also, the 12 to 32 lens only has a plastic mount, so I didn't want to be continuously replacing that. So I looked around for a second-hand option to use with that lens as a walk-around, and I came across a GX1 16 megapixel camera, about 6 years old, that I was able to buy from a UK distributor second-hand for just under £50. So I now have 2 Micro Four Thirds systems, one based on the GX9 with a telephoto lens, the other GX1 with the 12 to 32, which gives me a completely wide range, pretty much a little bit of a gap in the middle, but pretty much matches the range I had from the Sony and the Nikon. To give you an idea of the benefits here, just got a few numbers. The D7000 Tokina combination weighs about 1.9 kilos. That's a little under 4¼ pounds. In comparison, the GX9 with the 100 to 300 weighs 2 pounds 7 ounces, about 40% reduction in weight. And remember, I get dual image stabilization with that system. The Sony was 8 ounces, very small. The GX1 with the 12 to 32, a bit larger, 420 grams, 15 ounces. So in weight terms, it's about twice as much, but just under £1 to 8 ounces is really not a major deal, and the camera easily slips into a coat pocket. So I now have a system, or a 2-camera system, that enables me to take wide angle pictures up to 70, or wide-ish angle pictures up to 16 megapixel, and at the telephoto end I have the ability to go up to effectively 600mm full frame equivalent. Obviously, if I go out specifically for photographic trips, I have the option of changing the lens on the GX9 and putting a wider angle lens on that and taking advantage of the larger sensor. So the way I approached this was to look for something that would give me a better quality than the system I had previously, that would be far more portable, but that would not cost an excessive amount, and that would provide me with the image quality that I need. And as I said in the previous video, really, if I look at a 16 megapixel image, it will allow me to print out at close to A2 with a degree of interpolation at a quality I find acceptable, and I've had no problems of getting images with that camera accepted for stock images sites. So the GX9 with 20 megapixels rather than 16 obviously meets the same criteria. To give you an idea of the total cost for the two systems that I've ended up with, the GX9 cost me around 450, the 100 to 300 about the same, so £900. That also included, as a kit with the GX9, the 12 to 32mm lens that I use for wide angle, more wide angle work now. And on top of that, an extra £50 to buy the Lumix GX1 second-hand. So the whole system came in at around about £950. The cost of replacing or updating my D7200 to my D7000 to a D7200 would have been around about £800. Possibly I would have got 150 trade-in for the D7000, and putting a Tokina, a Tamron or a Sigma 100 to 400mm lens would have been another £600-700. So it would have cost me at least half as much again to go for that system. I would have gained very little in terms of weight. I might have gained something in terms of image quality and dynamic range, but on balance all of these things are trade-off, and I decided to cut my expenditure by going for the Micro Four Thirds system. Now that offers up some other possibilities in terms of using adapters in my existing range of Nikon lenses, and that's something that I will go to discuss in a future video.